The primary sector: agrarian spaces in the world, Europe and Spain. 1. Agrarian space. First of all, we are going to define what is the primary sector. The primary sector are all the economic activities devoted to obtaining resources directly from nature or from the natural environment. The agrarian activities are the following. First of all, agriculture. That is the method to cultivate the land in order to obtain plants and food. Then the livestock farming. That is the method to rearing animals for human use. On the other hand, the silviculture or forestry, the use of good land for human use. And finally, the fishing, the method to rear or rearing or catching fishes for human use. In relation to the human activities, we can find two types of spaces in the world: the agrarian spaces and the rural spaces. The agrarian spaces are all these lands where the agrarian activities are undertaken, for example, the pastures, the meadows, and the woodland. On the other hand, the rural space are all the agrarian spaces with the settlements or villages plus the facilities related to the agrarian activities, such as roads, granaries, or farms. Finally, nowadays in the world, the 36.8% of the active population in the world is related to the agrarian activities. But there is an imbalance between the less developed countries and the high development countries. We are going to find more active population in the less developed countries related to the agrarian activities in comparison to the active population in the high development countries. For example, more than the 50% of active population in the less developed countries and the agrarian activities suppose the 10% of GDP or more, in comparison to the high development countries where less than 10% of active population is working in the agrarian activities and the agrarian activities suppose less than 44% of GDP in these economies. The agrarian activities provide us many different raw materials and resources for human use. For example, we can find the agricultural products with different purposes: vegetable and fruits, and wheat for feed the human population. On the other hand, the alfalfa as fodder for the animals. And finally, the lining, one plant that whose main purpose is the confection of clothes for humans. In the livestock farming products, there are many different purposes for them. The eggs, for example, for human consume, the excrement of some animals, such as the excrements of guano, one seagull that we can find in Chile and Peru, to fertilize the land, the skin of some animals to obtain leather products, or sometimes the use of animal force to move or to work in the agricultural task. Finally, with fishing and forestry, we can obtain some important products for human use. For example, mushrooms to feed the people, wooden planks to produce furniture for the houses, or different fishing activities. To understand better the importance of agriculture in the different countries of the world, we are going to look at this map. This map shows us the labor force employed in agriculture in this year, 2015. If you watch the map, you can see that there are two types of countries in the world. Countries where the agriculture plays an important role in the economy, and countries where the agricultural suppose a little important role in the economy. So we can establish it one imaginary line between the agricultural countries and the less agricultural countries. So as you can see in the map, in the emerging countries and in the low developed countries, the agriculture and the rest of agrarian activities are very important for the national economies in these countries. To explain the agrarian activities in the world, we must take into account the different factors that conditionate these agrarian activities. So for that reason, in this point 2, I'm going to explain the physical and the human factors that conditionate the agrarian activities in the different countries of the world. The first factor is going to be the climate, the sunlight hours, the maximum and minimum temperatures in one territory, the levels of precipitation, and the wind conditioning the extension of the types of crops. It's not the same one country with one rainfall good drying conditions or with drought conditions in comparison to another country with a lot of rainfall in its climate. But sometimes we can find different types of crops that are able to adapt its condition to different types of climatic conditions. That is the case of the potato. That is considered one of the most important type of crops that you can cultivate in almost every type of soil, weather conditions, and relief. So for that reason, appeared one video related to the revolution of potato in the diet of humankind. Another important factor is going to be the relief of the land. For the agriculture, for example, are better the plains and valleys in comparison to the mountains to cultivate the different crops, because the slope of mountains require more work and investment. And for one climatic condition, the thermal gradient in the mountains. The thermal gradient means that every 6 degrees, every 100 meters of height in one mountain, the temperature decreases 0.6 degrees. So depending on the crops, you are going to need a specific type of temperature to cultivate this crop in one area. In contrast, the mountains are a good place for livestock farming and the forestry or silviculture. The third physical factor is going to be the soil and the vegetation. Depending on the type of vegetation, for example, the importance of the grassland are very important for the livestock farming, and overall the importance of the types of soil for the agriculture. That is the aspect that I'm going to explain with this image. We can divide the soil in different layers. More or less we can divide the soil in 5 layers. The first layer is the humus. The humus is the composite organic matter derived from the death of plants and animal matter, and is essential for the fertility. One soil with high levels of humus is a fertile soil. Below this layer we can find the topsoil and the subsoil, two layers composed by a mix of fragments of rocks and minerals. Below topsoil and subsoil we can find the parent rock and the bedrock. Two layers composed overall by rock and with a small fragments of minerals and rock, but overall by rocks. The fertility of one soil is placed on the first layer, the layer with humus. For the agrarian activities, the human factors are going to be essential too. First of all, the demographic pressure. More population means that you need to produce more crops to feed this population. This extension of the crops or this extension of the agricultural activities is going to produce the deforestation, the overexploitation of the soil, and more environmental problems. but one low population density can produce the decline of one area. So you need to find a balance between the demographic pressure and the agricultural areas. On the other hand, the technological development is very important to understand the different types of agriculture. Farming tools and techniques in traditional society, basic tools, the use of fallow technique, and natural fertilizers in comparison to the new techniques used by the advanced societies, such as tractors, chemical fertilizers, facilities like the greenhouse, and chemical fertilizers. Economic and social organization. Depending on the organization in the agricultural activities, we can divide between subsistence economy or subsistence agriculture, whose main goal is obtain product to survive for the peasant, against the market economy, whose main purpose is use the agricultural production to be sold in the market to obtain an economic benefit. Then we can find the difference between direct exploitation and indirect exploitation. In the first type is the peasant who works the land. In the second type, there is one agricultural owner who rents the land for another peasant. So the owner of this land doesn't work directly the land. Finally, the importance of the agrarian society to explain the reason behind the different types of agriculture. The agrarian policies are the legislation about the agrarian activities, and probably the most famous agrarian legislation is the CAP, the Common Agrarian Policy, one European policy related to the agrarian activities that must be followed by all the countries in the European Union. I will explain you with more detail this CAP in the point 10 of this unit. In these photos, you can see two problems related to the agricultural activities. First of all, one abandoned rural area in Guadalajara. The rural exodus, the big migration from the countryside to the cities, has produced the abandon of many rural areas in many countries. In some provinces of Spain, for example, there is a big problem of the population of rural areas. In the second photo, you can watch crops in the slope of one mountain. To cultivate in the mountains, one technique that usually the humans use is the creation of terraces, okay, where you can cultivate with this technique different crops in the slopes of the mountain. Here appears one comparison between the traditional agriculture and the modern agriculture. In the traditional agriculture, it's very common to find animals helping the humans in the different agricultural tasks. The use of natural fertilizers and the use of one agricultural technique that is the fallow. It's one technique where you only cultivate one part of the land, leaving without crops the other part of the land. In comparison to the modern agriculture, these peasants use chemical fertilizers. There is a process of mechanization in the agricultural tasks using, for example, tractors, and the construction of some important agricultural facilities with the use of plastic, for example, the greenhouse.